We're missing here two people.
Tonight is Orla Yudal Sivan, Hakakshin Samech Tes. We are learning Rabbi Yisrael's Hemshech Samech Tes on page on Daf Lamed Hey. Got a gapping.
What's with these two guys here? Anybody know what's the story with them? Right, so we saw the Indian of Seicho Mufla. And we brought it as a dogma of the Seicho, how it is, or the Indian of Chochmah the Atik. In other words, Chochmah, how it is in Pnimis HaKeser. And we saw that it was a Dova Nivdal Gamri. Kamish Kosi Bonki Macher, Bepirush Lei Nifleisi, Lei Ruchoiko Hi. Well, that's written in the Torah in Pasha Nitzovim, right near the end of Devarim. The Hebrew says that the Torah is not wondrous from you and it's not distant from you. And then he goes on to say, Loi b'shamayim hi v'loi ma'evar hayam hi. So the Rebbe said, the Rechoiko hainu al derech amati Echachmeh ve'hi rechoiche mimeni. That Shlomo HaMelech said that pasuk in regard to the Porah Aduma, as is brought down in Medrash Chazal, that he meant the in of the Porah Aduma. I have reached wisdom. Echachmeh, I'll even become more wise. Ve'hi rechoiche mimeni, it still remains distant from me. V'hainu b'bchinas makif. So the idea of a makif is something which is beyond you, and it's not malubish in the kli. However, it's not completely beyond any shaykhs to the kli, as one are. But the in for makif, a different madregas in makif, and that's what he says in the brackets about to come. Avo nifleis hainu shemufrash umuvdal legamri. It's separate and withdrawn completely. Makif le-makif. In other words, the union of a makif harochek, as it's called in Siddur, that the makif ha'atzmi, which is l'mayla from makif in the normal sense. Because the normal taich makif is something which is withdrawn or abstract to a certain union. So there's automatically, if you say it's makif al-zeh, then there's automatically a certain connection. But like you said, that you have a makif al haroish, like we saw when we get to the inif and keser. I don't know if we saw it here. Al chaponim the inif and a keser is a makif, but al chaponim it's got a certain relationship to the rosh. And the same with the makifim haraya shaychus al chaponim to say the hishtal shelo. So therefore he said rachoika means it's distant in the union of a makif al derech harogil. However, nifleis is the union for makif le-makif, are completely distant and withdrawn makif, which is not a makif al hakelim or a makif al ha'ivorim, but it's a makif ha-rochoik, it's moved al legamri. So therefore he said that's the union of mufrash, implying the word nifleis. And like we saw in the last week's parsha, when we get to the nozir, that we saw that ish ki yafli yalin the nozir, that's Russian alin the nozir lahazir lahashem. Rashi brings it the word nifleis. It says Rashi over there mufrash, mishara b'nei odo, mufrash meaning separate legamri. She'enu yochel lovei l'dei gilui klal. A level in Chokhmah which is not able to come into Chokhmah Gluya at all. Ukamaya derech Moshe Lamate, yesh siklim amukim made. They're very, very profound concepts, a very profound siklim. They're very profound siklim. The Mikol Mokim, Achla HaToyreach VaYagia VaMoka Yechelim Love Aleihem. But nonetheless, despite the fact that they're deep and they're profound ma'id, if you put a lot of effort and a lot of struggle and work, and putting a deepening of the mind, Hamoka is the union of profundity of the thought, meaning that's particularly connected with the union of das, that you deepen your mind in it by being makusha to the union. It's possible to come and reach that particular seichel. Okamoi Yogata Umatsoso Tamin, the Gemara in Masechta Megillah, that's become one of the 12 statements or pisgomim of the children, that the Gemara says over there that if Yogata V'loi Matsoso, somebody says, or rather the Gemara talks in the first person, the truth is, Yogati V'loi Matsosi, somebody says he struggled very hard, but he never got to what he was really working for. Al Tamin, you shouldn't believe him. And if somebody said Lo Yogati Umatasi, I didn't really make any effort, but somehow or another I found it, I got to the deep point, then Gamkein Al Tamin, you shouldn't believe him. Or Yogati Umatasi Tamin, then you should believe him. So there was we see that there is genuine Yegia, or that leads to Matzosi. So what's it the diuk tafki legavi sikli mamukim? So the diuk is that the Rebbe Melech Mashiach brings it down in many places, that the word moitze or matzia in Lashon Kodesh, particularly in Lashon of learning, indicates something that wasn't foreseen, and it was kilo shalei be'erech. If you're walking along and all of a sudden you find something, that's what's called in the Perek about Matziyos. A Matzio is that if you jump on the Matzio and you take it and you're koine it, etc., then it becomes yours if it doesn't have any simonim or it doesn't have any ways of the Baalim being able to claim it, etc. So we find that something that you didn't anticipate, you didn't know that it was going to be in your way, all of a sudden you find it and you jump on it. Well, that's called a matzia. That's called a finding, a matzia. So therefore the diuk of that Gemara is Yogati or Matzosi. If I really put in a lot of effort, then I come to inyonim which are mukim miderach harogir. They're beyond the normal reach of seichel. In other words, that they're makiv. They're not makiv le-makiv, but they're ochaponi makiv. Therefore, it's possible through Yogati to be able to say, in a way that you'll be believed by your hearers, that Matzasi, I take a found. However, Yeshin Yonim Sha'en L'Seichel Enushi Shum Movei Hasigom Klau. However, there's certain Inyonim what Seichel, as it is by a mensch. In other words, Seichel, as you might call it, human Seichel, but it means more than just human Seichel. It means Seichel how it is within the control of a Odom and a man. He doesn't have any Movei. What a Movei means, like a lead-in, how do you call it, a introduction section, introduction period. He doesn't have any lead-in that he should hasigom klal. He should be able to grasp these inyonim at all. Af im yatriach sikle aleim kol yoma. Even if he will be matriach his seichel all the days of his life, but since there's no lead-in, that it remains completely muvdal, and as we saw the Lashon mufrash, altogether from the normal usage of seichel, then no matter how much you'll be toreach, you'll never really get to, because there's no lead-in, there's no handles through which you might grasp such an inyan. Akamesh Kosev, like it's written in Iyov, and the Alter Rebbe brings it in Tanya at the beginning of Perek Beis. Hacheke elaka timta. If you will research divinity, will you then find? Is it possible to find? Emes of divinity, amitius elakus, is beyond altogether the grasp of seichel enushi. It's completely a meidler altogether of seichel enushi. and even certain functions of the Eibishter are beyond our Kemavur. Being as it is, in Shaykh only to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore it's brought down that no matter how you be Toreach, to understand the actual Mahus Inyan of Yesh Mi'ayin, you'll never be able to understand it. You can describe and discuss the Toitzos of Yesh Mi'ayin, what that means, and how things are if they came Yesh Mi'ayin. Aber it's a Mahus Inyan of Yesh Mi'ayin, Vibala does is Shaykh only to Hashem, and therefore it fits into the klal of Hacheke Elakatim. Will you then find? Ukemoi. Yeah, now we see another interesting inyan which moves down somewhat from Etzem Elakus, but nonetheless we're going to give it the what you might call the geder of a Dova Bilti Musa Klal, an Ein Movei Eitzel B'nei Adam. Ukemoi Shaf Shiadua La Koyo Shamochim Vazman Haim Roim Umuchudoshim Hu Yisborach. So the Rebbe said, even though that's a Dova Yadua, meaning that that's a more Poshetazach, that Mokim, place and time, they are both created entities, Mechudoshim, and they came about Yesh Mi Ayin. Mechudoshim means that they came about something completely new, Yesh Mina Ayin. Who is Barak Lamaila Mibchinas Mokim Uzman? Since Mokim and Zman are creations, the things that were brought about Yesh Mi'ayin, then moving that the Eibishter completely be beyond them altogether. So the Rebbe, that's a Dova Yadua, and that fits into what we saw, the principle of Hacheke Elakatim, that in Elakus Kamoishu Lamaila Mi. Creation, it's easier for us to be really masik him and to really understand him. So the Rebbe says, V'gam, in addition to that, Kol achoikrim iskimu shelamayla migalgala tashi ein shum mokim klal lo yireikus chulu. V'im kol zeh ein musik klal eich yitochen v'chinas bli shum mokim uzma. So this is the thing which is quoted often in Chassidus, that all of the Chokrim, all of them agree that beyond the Galgal HaTashi, then there's no place and there's no time. So the Galgal HaTashi, if you remember in the Rambam calls that that's a very important Galgal. He says that in our particular main universe, or our particular section of the universe, that's what he calls the Tisha Galgalim, the 9 planets. For example, there's our planet, and there's what we call Mars, and Mazel Ma'adim, and then there's Mazel Choyret, and Pluto, or whatever they call them, Venus, Novazoch, Inyanim. And the Rambam says that altogether there are 8 of them, and then there's a 9th one, that the Galgal HaTashi, he's like an all-governing one, and he, as it were, guides their orbits, and he can, as it were, oblige them into certain changes or what you might call shibudim, to his determination, how they're going to be mistaviv and how they fit into the whole Seder, and how they're going to go around one the other and so on. When you get to the sun and to other inyonim, there's this Galgal Tashi, 9th planet or Galgal. He's like the general guiding Galgal of all the other 8 Galgalim. The Rambam tells about a Barichas in Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah. So what the Rambam writes is that those 8 Galgalim, the Galgal HaTashi and the Shemesh and the Yoreach and a few other inyanim, what he reckons out there, they fit into our whole general, what I suppose nowadays you would call it galaxy, or our whole area. And he says that beyond that, ain't shum dover. Beyond that, there's not really anything the way we understand anything, because he says that it's l'mayla misman or l'mayla mi makom, or it's not zman and it's not makom. It's not even reikus. It's not even, now this Lashon which occurs here is not necessarily the Lashon of the Rambam, because the Rambam writes a Pekitza, or in other Sforim, the Sefer Ikrim, or Od Sforim, they write about this Barichas, they discuss the whole Inyan, and they say that once you go beyond that guiding Galgal, where he's like a sort of a koyach kloli beneged to all the certain Maimonic Chassidus, what they discuss the yachas of all the Galgalim to the Galgal Teshi. Of it's very long discussion and conversation. It's not really nogea so much to the inyan here. Therefore, we won't go into all the pratim. But once you get beyond that, you don't even have what's called emptiness. In other words, you don't even have vacuum. Because if I say vacuum, then I'm just being shoylel a certain inyan which belongs in makom, and for that matter belongs in zman. Dainu, air or gas or oxygen or what. Yeah, but if I say reikus, then I mean nothing exists there. There's no, it's what's called a vacuum. From the word reik, meaning empty. So the daytime that after the Galgala Tashi, there's not even what you can call emptiness. It's just completely beyond a place and beyond time. Because for what you say, it's reik, means something, then to a certain extent you're saying that it's biyachas to it, and it just doesn't have it. But if you say it's completely beyond that altogether, then you can't even talk about it being empty. Because it's not empty, and it was never full, that it should be empty. There's nothing there. Not mokim, not zman, not time. So the Rebbe says, I challenge you, that's what he's saying, to picture in your mind an area or an entity or a state where there's no place or even trace of place or even the negation of place, and there's no time, even the trace of time or the negation of time. How do they say in Yiddish? Esunishto. Just not there. Klau klalo. So the Rebbe said, your mind can't grasp that. Seichel Enushi, even Seichel Enushi in its higher madrega, is not able to grasp or to picture such a inyan. Because the whole way we function is in Mokim was mind. Everything that we deal with in our whole system of understanding is that we're always being miyachas one inyan to another, or to picture something that there's absolutely no time or no place. Well, that's very hard for us, and not only it's very hard, it's just not chaya. You don't really have any hasoga there. All you can do is maybe talk about it. You can say, well, that's what they say. Beyond the Galgalachi, ein mokim ve'ein ein zman. So the Rebbe, Gam kol hachorichim iskimo, and this is an interesting thing, that even though many of the Chochem disagree with when they get to the Galgals and how they work, and whether the Galgal HaTashi is as powerful as this one holds, he is, and others don't, not so much. There's differing opinions about the Galgalim and their function and their relationship to the Shemesh and the Yoreach for Chulu. However, he said all of them agree that once you go beyond what you might call the boundaries of the whole universe which we find ourselves, then everybody agrees that ein mokim ein zman. So therefore said the Rebbe, ve'im kol zeh ein musag klal eik yitochim b'china b'li shum mokimo ma. ואין האף של להשיג בשום שכל כלל, איך ומהו. He says, with any sort of seichel that you will call on, and any seichel that you might muster up, to use the expression, you can't possibly understand it. So what does it mean if an im kol zeh? What is it? The word im kol zeh means like aful pikein. Aful pikein. What is the aful pikein? How does that fit in? I mean, we're just going ahead and saying that where there's no mokimus man, and you can't really be masikid, and so that's what the maskana is, that we can't grasp. Bechina she'ein bo Eloi mokim v'loi. Now, what's the im kol zeh? It's a little bit sort of tricky use of the lashon. And in the next page or so, there's going to be a few usages of lashonas, which I find are very difficult to actually understand them the way they're printed. I would be surprised if there's not. I looked up in another hemshech on the Rebbe, which talks about these inyonim, and two things that I felt were slightly misprinted here, I could prove to be right, because over there it's written differently than what it was written here. There seems to be a little bit of, when it came to this very difficult Indian, somehow they got a little bit, they got a little bit hoity-toity, and in my opinion they've misquoted, or they've misprinted a couple of things. But however, let's say that the Yim Kol Zeh is really supposed to be there. What's it the Yim Kol Zeh? I mean, it's the flow of the argument. So I think what we could suggest is that he began by saying that Amitius Lamaila Mihasogas Enoish Paklal is Elikus. Acheke Elokar Timta. Will you then find? No way, because Etzem Elikus Lamaila Mi Habrio, Lamaila Mi Stau Shel Sa'ilamas is Eino Movin Lano Klal Eino Kol Shiu Bezeh. So we have to say that we talk a lot about the Eivisha, what touch we don't understand. So we have to say we're talking about the Inyan of Mahusa Inyan, the essence of what it means Elikus. So that you have no musik whatsoever. So I might have thought what is completely beyond any understanding is Elikus. Oh, but the Inyan from beyond the Galgal Tashi, I mean that's all area which L'chora came about. It's like it's just the negation of certain principles which we are used to in the created being. And if I might have thought that that's in the Geder at least of a Seichel Nelam or a Seichel Roche, I would have said this completely. And therefore the Rebbe said, even though that's not Elikus, and it's already in of being like negating things that are known to us, nonetheless, he calls that ain't a moving. You can't be mashing it. Cloud, because we don't mean you can't talk about it. Here we're talking about it. We're saying there is such a thing. What he means is you can't appreciate it, Kamosha, who, and that's what we meant in Benegir to Yesh Mi'ayin. We can talk about Yesh Mi'ayin a lot, and there's a lot of Hezbedim in Yesh Mi'ayin, in Yonim, which are Machriach, both the force behind Yesh Mi'ayin and the Teitzor of Yesh Mi'ayin. You can't talk about the Etzem Mahus in of Yesh Mi'ayin. And therefore, even though that's already in L'choira, the Geder of just beyond the Galgalim, and it's within the realm, it would seem, of a severe effort on the part of the Nivroim to maybe grasp it. So he says, no, how is it even applicable that there should be a Bechina B'li Shum Mokimo Zman? In other words, it's not, you can't even understand how a thing like that can be possible. You see, Eich Umahu doesn't mean that we can't talk about the possibility of such a thing. We can't understand Eich Umah. What Eich means, how and what it is. In other words, Mahus. We can't understand the Eichus and the Mahus of that inyan. Well, that is a dogma for the concept of Seichel Mufla, meaning you could struggle your whole life to grasp the Eichu Mahu of Lamaila Mizman or Lamaila Mi Makom, and you'll never make it. Shehu Lamaila Mikoyach Seichel Enushi Lagamre, altogether. Okay, so he brings an example, and this is something that we find a similar type of usage of Loshen that the El Torah brings in Shara Yuchav Amun in Perek Tes over there. But the El Torah says that to understand Chochmah, Amitius, how it is in Elikus, that's like saying that you can't understand it, that it's Lamaila, how do you call it, normal understanding. Well, that's to make a joke, because it's just so completely beyond understanding that if you said just Lamaila for normal understanding, then you're completely putting it out of its proportion. You follow? So the Elder Rebbe says the truth is that just like a stone has no knowledge whatsoever of Chokhmah, Chokhmah Datzila, we have no knowledge of these inyanim. So that's what he says here. Yes, it says, just like, I'm sorry, just like even human understanding is completely withdrawn and completely beyond altogether, how do you call it, where am I? It's completely withdrawn from the stone, the physical stone, and from the ability to feel. In other words, that's what the Alter Rebbe continues over there in Shara Yichud. He said, it's like you were saying, I can't touch the understanding of Chokhmah Elyoina with my hands. So the Alter Rebbe writes, whoever will hear that will laugh at you, because they're just completely, absolutely no basis of comparison. Klal. So there he says, it's the same thing. That seichel enushi, the understanding in normal seichel of a mensch is completely withdrawn from a physical stone, and even from the Chush Hamishus. You can't touch Seichel Enushi either. It's just completely ridiculous to say that. Kach v'china Seichel Mufla now. In a similar way, or that Seichel beyond man, umokim mudu mi Seichel Enushi. In the same way. You know, just like our Seichel Enushi has absolutely no comparison basis to a stone or to Chush of touch, in the same way, our Seichel Enushi has no grasp of things which are completely seichel mufla in the same way. In other words, that our seichel, the gavidat, is like doimim, or like saying that I can't touch it with my physical, that everybody would laugh at it when you say that. So we see then that it's a tremendous milchak, a tremendous distance, the inyan of seichel mufla from seichel enush, even from Seichel Enushi in its highest and best and most praiseworthy form. So says the Rebbe, Al derech zeh, uvan ha'efresh bein Chokhmah da'atik leChokhmah stimor. He said, in the same way we'll now be understand the difference between Chokhmah da'atik and Chokhmah stimor. Chokhmah stimor, he b'chinas Seichel ne'elam. It's the inyan of hidden seichel, shehu lamayla mibchinas chokhmah da'atzilas, v'alidei zeh hu b'chinas mokeh lechokhmah da'atzilas, shenimshek mizeh gilui ha'ora b'chinas chokhmah da'atzilas. Au is b'chinas chokhmah da'atik, zeu kinyan seichel mufla, shehu lamayla lagamri mikoyach hasoger shebechokhmah da'atzilas bria yitzirava nasiyah. He said the inyan from Chokhmah da'atik, it is completely and utterly moved all together. In other words, that here we have the two examples of Seichel Ne'elam and Seichel Mufla. So Chokhmah Stimor is a very high madrega in Chokhmah. Like we saw the example that the Avisha said, the Moshe Rabbeinu Shteik Kach Al Machshov Lefonai, it's a very high madrega. But he said at least it's got a certain yachas to Chokhmah da'atzilas. Dahainu, it's ne'elam mi Chokhmah da'atzilas. Alidei aliyas gedolos in Chokhmah da'atzilas, it might be possible eventually to be oile into at least some madrega in Chokhmah stimor. He said, but from Chokhmah stimor to Chokhmah da'atik, that's a jump which is legamri shaloi be'er klal, and you can't really say that Chokhmah da'atik is even a mokeh even for Chokhmah stimor. Chokhmah stimor has got some sort of a relationship to Chokhmah da'atzilah. But both of them have absolutely no relationship to Chokhmah da'at. And that's the inyan of Seichel Mufla, Seichel Ne'elam, and Seichel Stam. But that's the dogma how they are lamayla. ועל כל פנים, said the Rebbe, Chokmah Da'atzil, ועל ידי זה הוא בחינת מוקר לחוכמah Da'atzil. Since the Indian from Chokmah Stimur, it's interesting, in this particular point, the Rebbe works back the other way. He says that Chokmah Stimur is Seichel HaNelam, and that's L'mayla mi Chokmah Da'atzilus, aber al yidei zeh hu b'chinas mocher l'Chokmah Da'atzilus. Normally we say that Chokmah Da'atzilus can't really be masik Seichel HaNelam, just mitzad atzmai. Well, there are a lot of aliyahs it could maybe be masik. Over here the Rebbe goes the other way around. He says, since it's ne'elam mi Chokmah Da'atzilus, is a sign that it can be a mocher to Chokmah Da'atzilus, because it's only ne'elam mimeno, not completely mufrash. And therefore it can be a mocher to Chokmah Da'atzilus. How? Shenimshach mizeh gilui ha'ora b'chinas Chokmah Da'atzilus. Imam Chokmah Stimur can be and is a mocker to Chokmah Da'atzilus. Avu b'chinas Chokmah Da'atik zeu ki inyan seichel mufla shulamayla legamre mekor hasoga shebechokmah Da'atzilus bria Atzilus, even Atzilus. He's curled even the Indian of Atzilus. In other words, it's legamri l'mayla from all the madregas of Chokmah. K'moyo derech Moshe, shinin koyach haskolos mahus va'eichutz habechina shel l'mayla mi'amochi muzman u'mayla legamri mi koyach seichel hatzoget seichel hanushi. Yeah, here we see clearly that we're not talking just about the fact that there is such a inyan of Mayla Mimochim Uzman, we're talking about grasping at how it is in its Mahus inyan. Therefore it says that the Koyach HaSkolah of a mensch is beyond, it's not able to grasp the Mahus Va'eches of the Bechila Shel Mayla Mizman Umochim. Yeah, so then he says, because Favus, Hainu, Shegam B'koyach HaMaskil Sheba'odom, Ein Boi Koyach Lovei Ala Sogazu. Even in the Koyach HaMaskil, he doesn't have power to come to that Asoga of L'mayla Mizman U'mokim. Ke'enoi Rach Koyach, Ke'eno Rach Koyach Lahasik, Ke'eno Rach Koyach Lahasik Siklim Shebeged Seichel Enushi. He said, you can't, even in the Koyach HaMaskil, you can't be masik the inyan of L'mayla Mizman U'mokim. So what's the inyan from Koyach HaMaskil? As we've discussed on many occasions already, Koyach HaMaskil is the mind, literally. It's that undefined Koyach, which is nimshach for the Koyach HaYuli HaAtzmi, the Etzem HaNefesh, and that's where you gain all your siklim from. When you need a new seichel, then the Koyach HaMaskil produces you a Borach HaMavri. It gives you a boom, and if you work hard, they take it from there, and you can be Megala the Seichel and Dabina V'Ka'ita V'Zeh. Or that Koyach Hiyuli, or that general or potential power, which produced the new Siklim.
No, it's fine.
Follow the end of it.
No,
Huh?
it's good.
I was rather surprised by the indifference of our technician. I would have thought you would have jumped up and grabbed it immediately.
Yeah. Still recording.
Well, why is it gaping out very sort of amazedly? Will I look different or something else? Otherwise, maybe I've gone up into Seichel Da'atik. All right, so the Rebbe says that the Koyach HaMaskil is a very high power, because the Koyach HaMaskil is beyond any specific cycle. It's the Koyach HaYuli, the all potential power in our mind, which produces a Sichlim. And it's a gilui from the Etzem HaNefesh, from the Koyach HaYuli HaAtzmi in the Etzem HaNefesh, and it's what we call Hamshocha Ne'alemas. We've heard about it before. It's like Hamshocha, not B'derech Gilui Mamish, but it's B'derech Hamshocha, still Be'elim from the Etzem HaNefesh. And that's where we get everything from. So I might have thought that, Eino Chanami, I can't be Masig in my Seichel Golui, but maybe hidden in the Seichel Koyach HaMaskil, there's an ability to be Masig, or that Indian from Lamayla Mizman Mokim. So he says, no, even within the Koyach HaMaskil, even within the Koyach HaYuli, Mitzad the Etzem HaNefesh, you're not able to even picture in that Madrega what certain people are able to use that Madrega for themselves, that they're able to think in a way that they're inside the Koyach HaMaskil. Yeah. Even there, if you could be on such a high madrega as a Bal Hasogya, you wouldn't be able to picture Lamaylam Zmanu mocking boyfriend Eichus Mahu. Why? He says, Ki Eino Rak Koyach Lahasik Siklim Shebeget Seichel. What do you want from the Koyach HaMaskil, sister? It's only all it is. It's just a general power, a muvdal dika hiyuli, which is holy and is to produce siklim, which after all are beget seichel anushi. Eino Hanami, high ones and delicate ones. It's not going to produce you something which is beyond the whole ability of a human mind to grasp the mahus of that in him. And therefore he said, for example, the chokhmah of astronomy, sharei chokhmas, and other chokhmas like I suppose medicine and other zolchinyonim, but they're very elevated and very powerful, very delicate sikhlim, but nonetheless a sikhlim, but they do fit into the realm of seichel enushi sokosov. They do gain their gilui and their explanation on the day seichel enushi. Therefore, even nowadays, with all the wonders of astronomy, its whole in is to come down and be explained, at least in ways that Seichel Anushi are still able to deal with, even though they themselves reach all sorts of amazing maskonas, but they agree they can't really understand. They can explain that over. What about Torah? Torah is the Chokhmah Elokis. So how do you say that we understand Torah? If we only understand things, even in our Koyach HaMaskil, in Inyonim and Seichel Anushi, how do we understand Torah? So there says the Rebbe, V'chein Chokhmas HaTorah. The whole Inyan of Torah, the way it's given to us, Kemoishin Islabshu Begashmiyas. The whole Inyan of Matan Torah was that the Torah came down and it was Mishlavish in the Olam HaGashmi, and therefore all the Inyanim in Nigla Torah and Afilu in Pnimis HaTorah are all guided by the Kloli HaTzeichel in Olam HaTachton. And therefore we see the famous Biur and Siddur that the Inyan from Chokhmas HaTorah came all the way down even into what we call tiners of Sheker and Nochazocher, people tining in the Bezdin and trying to outplay one the other with all sorts of possible ideas that they could say and suggest, and this one's got a migu and this one doesn't have, but this one's got a chazaka and it's got something else, and each one is playing on his cards in front of the Bezdin. So we see that that's all in Yonim Elokiyim, like the Alter Rebbe brings in Perek Hey and Tanya, but that's the way they've come down into Gashmi. So even the way we learn Torah, which is Chokhmah Elokis, but we learn the way it is in Olam HaGashmi, in the Inyan and Seichel Enushi, Sof Kol Sof. Avri said Lahaskil Ulamoid Al Yediyah Shelamayla Migeda Sichleinu. Obi said to produce an idea and to really understand. La'amuid means to really appreciate it. Al Yediyah, on some idea, which is Lamayla Migeda Sichleinu. It's beyond our whole definitional entity or our whole definitional state. Our Seichel Ein boy ze ba'koyach klal. The Koyach HaMaskil doesn't have that in all of its potentiality at all. So come to us, the tzokos we're limited, even with all our high inyonim and seichel, can go into different madrigas, and we can be maskil, all sorts of deep inyonim, so that if it's all in a way how the world governs your seichel. and how the Olam HaGashmi is determined through the kli of your guf, what you're going to be ultimately able to masi. So therefore says the Rebbe, come to us, that we're limited, we can't go beyond into mahus, the eiches of certain inyanim, because we're limited in, even in the mokir atzmi of our seichel. Ki im, says the Rebbe, koyach ha-shoifeya yediyah v'chokhmah zu, or who gives forth then this shoifeya, this yediyah v'chokhmah zu, who gives forth this chokhmah which is beyond the gather of our seichel? Zu, I'm sorry, zeu chokhmasi is borach shebe'es sfiras. Now this is a big tumult. The shom ha-yediyah v'asoge hi binyanim shalamayla mebchinas moke umuzman u bebchinas yediyas mahus aruchni. Achal derech zeh bebchinas seichel mufla hu lamayla gam mikoyach ha-nelam the bebchinas chokhmah ha-mizgala be'a tzila. Now, if you think about that carefully, it doesn't seem to make any sense. The whole sentence doesn't sort of quite come together. And I must admit that I studied the sentence for a long time, and I can't really make any sense out of it. So what I'm going to suggest is that there's probably, after being ma'ayin in some Khalid and other places in Siddur, that it could be that there's a slight misprint here. And when they say, when it's written here, that what gives the idea of what that which is l'mayla from our seichel is the inyan from chokmah seiz borach, his chokmah shebes esfiras hagenuzes. In other words, not just stam esfiras, but esfiras hagenuzes. Esfiras hagenuzes, there, l'mayla me'ach afilo, according to a lot of his berim, that they're mamishin pshitas elokus in Atik. Amamele, Shom, in that level, Ayediyah v'asoge, he binyanim shalamayla mechinas moke uzman. There, einachanami. There, the Yediyah is lamayla memoke uzman, and the Yediyah over there is in mahus of ruchnis. Mahus, in the very essence of spiritual inyanim, like we just said, that's beyond our abilities. Over there, it's what gives ever there should be a koyach, not the koyach HaMashkel of the Adam himself, but it would be a divine gift, Bilmaila, given to him by that level in the essence of Spirit, which is Masik that Inyan, and that would be a very special gift. It wouldn't be a normal Inyan Klau Mitzad the Adam. And that's Ulai, that's what we find by Shloimeh HaMelech. It's written, Vashem nosan chokhmah l'Shloimeh. The Eibishter gave chokhmah into Shloimeh. And remember, where you gain as a gift, milmaila, then it could be a nachanam, that you're masik it. Of a blizer, you're not able to be masik as a bechina klau.
Don't you say in the essence spirits is the union of Makan? In the essence spirits, there's the union of Makan?
Yeah, well, you see, what we're saying is that the essence spirits themselves are not yet mocking. But since they're the union from Chokhmah Da'atzilas, they're already the beginning of a Zahar Soga, which can eventually be in mocking. Let's put it this way: they're not able to be masig l'mayla me'amokim altogether. L'mayla me'amokim is man. They're not able to be masig altogether. I mean, they can certainly talk about it like we talk about it in a way of a mamish mahus idea of something which is completely and utterly beyond the Zman of Mochim Nagamri. That's not shaykh even in Chokhmah Da'atzilas.
By the Esseres HaGnuzah, there's no Mochim over there?
No, in Esseres HaGnuzah, that according to Ayin Beis, that's mamish in the Esseres now Tzimtzum.
Only by Tzilah.
That's mamish, normally speaking, when we say Esseres, we mean Atzilas. And here we're talking Chokhmah Da'atzilas, and we're saying that even Chokhmah Da'atzilas doesn't have that. And how much more so Stam Esseres? It doesn't quite get together. But it is with the Hemshech now. And now he goes on and he says, similarly in this way, it's beyond, not only it's beyond our seichel enushi, and we can only come to a divine idea in the same way. Yeah, the Seichel Mufla Lamaila, which we said was Shaita Atik, Azul Lamaila Gam Mikver Hanelem, the Begins Chochma Hamishgala Bia Atzilas. In other words, it's beyond altogether, even the Indian from Chochma, which is Mishgala in Atzilas, even from Chochma Stimora. Because Chochma Stimora goes down as at least a Ha'ora into Chochma Da Atzilas. Remember, Chochma Da Atzilas, L'cher is Mamish Chochma Da Esesphiris Da Atzilas. And now we just said no, that in Esesphiris, show him yeah. In the previous sentence, he said it's yeah. Yeah, that's where you can be massacred. Now he's saying that even in Chochma Da Atzilas, how much more the other Esesphiris. And therefore, we have to say that there's some slight misprint in the sentence, otherwise it doesn't come together. And therefore, we have to say that that's my suggestion, that in that way we could maybe alter it. Seichel Mufla, Hulamayla Gam Mikver Hanelam, the Begins Chochma Hamishgala Ba'atzilas. In other words, at Kaviyochel, even Chochma Da'atzilas doesn't have an emissary understanding of Lamaila Mi Reikus, Lamaila Mi Vacuum, and Lamaila Mi Zman, Mamish, even Mahusi, even Chochma Da'atzilas doesn't have. That's a pillar. It's a pillar. In other words, that if we would have a Zah Hasoga, then we'd understand all sorts of Inyonim in Elokus, which we're not able to understand now. And then Kaviyochel had Moshe Rabbeinu even. Had he had a Zah Hasoga, Mamish B'tachas HaShleimas, maybe he mightn't have asked the Eibishter, which is only Mitzad Chochma Stimua, not Mitzad Emes the Seichel Mufla, he mightn't have said to the Eibishter, Zu Torah V'Zu Schora, because he would have been massing the absolute pshitas of Al Inyonim, how they're completely beyond the whole Inyan of Zman U'Mokim, B'Madrega also Maki Gavoya, and that then it would be possible, if you had that type of Matona, Mu'Maila, then you wouldn't have any Shaivas Klau. Kein Yesh Loima, das ist der Bio Gadol. V'lachein, since even Chochma Stimua is not Musik Mamish in Atzilas, and how much more so? Seichel Mufla, it's not Musik Mamish in Atzilas, not even in that level, which is Mishgala in Chochma Atzilas. Lochein Spain, Bechinas Chochma Da'ati, Bechinas Chochma Stimua, Tzorik Leish Parza Bein Hayam. In other words, that in order that Chochma Stimua should be able to give over something in the Chochma Atzilas, and in such a way that they won't be masig, Seichel Mufla, then we have to say that there's a parza between Seichel Mufla and Seichel Nelam, which is Chochma Stimora. Because Chochma Stimora and Chochma Da'atzilas are basically, for our purposes, Bekesha Echad La'Sheni. And therefore, if we're going to say that Seichel Mufla is Muto Mihem Lagamri, how's it able to give Ashpor even in the Chochma Stimora? And therefore we have to say there's a parsa Bein Zela Lazer. What's the union of that parsa? The close union of parsa. Or the close of that union of the parsa between this parsa, between Seichel Mufla and Seichel Elam. He said that is Isa Be'et Chaim Shar Hanal, Perek Gimel, Shalidei HaMasochim Misaver Ha'er K'tzas. That through the union of the Masochim, what that means, Parsois, Masochim means curtains, and Pars is the Ramic word for curtain. Through the Parsois, then the oil becomes thickened. How do you call it? Thickens a little. The oil, the word Aver means thick. Misaver, it becomes literally, as they say in Yiddish, grubbing a vessel. It becomes a little bit sort of thicker and a little bit more coarse than what it was Lamaila Me'al Pars. It's a very periodic musag. He said the earth becomes thickened somewhat. The inyan at Tzimtzum, and we saw before that there were two inyan. There had to be a Tzimtzum and a parsa. He said the inyan at Tzimtzum who rak miyot or oil avad, but that only holds back certain intensities in the oil and doesn't allow it to be mamish misgala. Or that you should have another type of oil altogether. Our alidea masochim ba'apartsois misave ha'oil she'ena kemoya oil koidim. It looks on the other side of the parasol like another oil. And just like we said, when an oil goes through a parasol, it looks to be a different type of oil than what it was before the parasol. Even though basically it's the same oil. So that was the Rebbe. That's the pu'ula of the parasol, is that it causes a slight thickness or shinui in what you might call the texture of the oil. Va'ishavas ha'oil nasa al yidei yislabshus v'ha'akova shal yod al shal yidei sha'oil mislabish umisake. It literally goes in the form of a slabshus, and it holds itself back literally. It becomes held up. Misakev, it sort of becomes delayed almost. Misakev v'madregesh mislabish boy harihu misave v'nase kemohusa malbish, not kemohusa malubash, no, mohusa malbish. And here I'm certain that I'm right, because they stated in some doubt. About the malbish means the levush, which is taking this thing inside it. Of a mulubash is the thing that's entered the levush. So here we're talking about the thing which is entering the levush, and we say it doesn't become like the levush. So you can't say it doesn't become like the mulubash, because then you're talking about itself. It doesn't become like the malbish, the thing which is surrounding it like a levush. I misava nasi kemahusa malbish. Kamashikosim mizeh b'dibur ha'maskil tiku reish samach daled. Now that's a good dogma. It's a cloud from the London in Shas and Chulu that they say that wherever, if you're learning a Tesis quotes another Gemara or he brings some Indian, then you must always look it up. You will always get a much better idea what Tesis is talking about if you look up the Indian that he brings. And you don't just rely on the fact of what he says. In other words, you don't trust anybody. when it comes to learning, you always look up the Makif from what he brings. I mean, of course you can trust Tesis, but if you look up, you see what he really is meaning. And the same here, if you want, when the Rebbe brings a thing like this, then you don't say, oh yeah, well, that's written in you take out a Reisam and you take a look. So, if you do, then you're going to have to put on glasses about this thing, because that is one of the most amazing Drushim and Siddur. There were certain times, as in Makubal by the Chassidim, that with the Rebbe Rashabit it just poured out, and it's unbelievable. And those 2 times of the year were Shvuos and Tishrei. But in Tishrei it was Shmini Atzeres b'Miyuchad. Shmini Atzeres b'Miyuchad. Not even Simchas, not all that many Maimorim in Simchas Torah. From Shmini Atzeres, and I challenge you, look up all the Maimorim in Shmini Atzeres. They're usually mamish Maimorim. It just pours, which is unbelievable. Ishtapchetz. And the same with Shvuos. That's why Bohem Shalayim base began with Shvuos. It just kept going, yeah. And going. And I said, as you look into all the Hemshekim of Shvuos, the Rebbe Rashab, you see they're all, much longer and much more complex. And it's Gista. It pours and so forth. So the same is in that line over there. So I'm only telling you the Inyanim which are written over there. I'm not necessarily saying that you should look up, because if you do, I'm not sure how you're going to really make a lot of sense out of it, because it just goes and goes over the details of the Inyanim, but mamish pellet. However, over there, the Rebbe, maybe if I give you just a brief prelude of what we're getting into here, what's written over there in Samech Tes and Beklavim in other places, well, that'll help us run through the Lashon. It'll be a little bit easier to deal with. What he says over there in Samech Tes is that normally when you say a parsa, what have you done? When you say that you put a parsa, now the oil goes on the other side of the parsa, what sort of a way can we explain that in Moshel and in experience? So the very famous mashal for a parsa is what's called a mashal. A mashal is a mashal for a parsa. In other words, when you say a mashal, you put the thing into oisias. But those oisias compared to the oisias of the original Haskalah are very different oisias. They're oisias where they don't talk in the same language as the original oisias, and they're like oisias not in a good order at all. They talk about a double gashmi, they talk about a camel or something. They talk about some sort of gashmi which don't have any yachas to the unbelievable delicacy of the matter you're trying to give over. As well known, Rashi brings down in Sanhedrin, in Daf Mem Gimel, the Rashi brings down that Reb Meir was he was a Moishel Mashal. The Gemara doesn't say that at the end, that Mishameis Reb Meir, Nifsach, has written a Posku, Moishel Mashalim. That Reb Meir was so Rashi brings a couple of these Mashalim from Reb Meir Takta. Rashi brings them in a Gemara doctor. He reads about somebody put a piece of cheese inside a bucket, was going down into a well, and certain animals like cheese, and so they came along an animal, and he jumped onto the bucket because he wanted to get to the cheese, and then he went down, and then all of a sudden he decided it wasn't so worth the cheese because he's down, how's he going to get up? And then all of a sudden somebody comes along, rolls him up, and a whole big mass with a whole guns and do it. And Rashi says that these are Mishalim Mishli Reb Meir. So we see that the mashal can sometimes talk about things which are zarim mihanimshal. Right? They don't have any kesher with the nimshal. But if you follow carefully and you knew what you were talking about, and you can use your application of imagination for chuluk, then you can get to the spiritual union, to the nimshal. However, what happens is that on the other side of the mashal, the whole thing looks very different than what it did before the mashal, and it looks almost like a funny spiel in another world altogether, different than the original. Yeah, nachon? So that's the union of normally of a mashal. And the parsa between Atzilus and Biyah is b'diuk like that. Because Atzilus, Iyu, Chayu, Chad, Elokus, Pagoloi. Biyah, Nivroim, Gashmim. Well, not Gashmim until you get down to Olam Hazeh, but Nivroim, Yeshmi, I'm completely another entity altogether, which has no real material. How did you get to that? Yeah, through the parsa. And the parsa is just like a marshal. Like we saw. Oh, we didn't say it in 9 base, we saw. But all the inyonim in the Elams are just misholim, my fellow. Cool. Because that's where they came about, from a parsa. The parsa is a marshal. In the fact, a normal parsa, in inverted commas, it produces you with another material altogether. Oh, Shalom Makirim over. If you work hard, then you get back. Masha'ik, this parsa between Atzilas, between Lamayla Atzilas and Atzilas, or this parsa between Hadikodim, Chochma Da'ati and Chochma Stimula, or these parsas, says the Rebbe, they work slightly differently, and they're what's called oisias, but they're called oisias hachakika. He says that those are oisias which are, chopped into the very essence of the matter. So how do they change anything? So the Rebbe says that when you look at a stamp that you push into Shaiva, a stamp has got on a beautiful shining stone that there's been oisias made in it to make it into a stamp, then the stone is so bright that you just see a bright stone at first glance. But if you look a little bit more closely, you see that the stone has become, as it were, darkened by the oisias. Where the oisias are, there's a slight trace of like lack of brilliance in the light. This statement says, that those oisias, even though they're part of the stone, they cause a slight darkness in the stone, which means that they cause a slight irida, that the oisias give over now a message which is not the absolute shining pshitas of the stone. On the other hand, he said that those oisias, being as they are, just oisias hachekike, they'll just give over, what you want to give over, and they don't seem to be mashana anything. So he said, yeah, they're not mashana anything, but they make the air a little bit, thicker. They make the air a little bit more, sort of It's hard to describe, and he himself says it's hard to describe what it means. It's thick, but we'll soon see in a second what it means. And the oil becomes a little bit thicker, and then that oil can go down into Atzilas and become Shaykh L'Chochmah Atzilas, and then eventually it even becomes Shaykh to the Slapsis and the Kelim of Atzilah. And that's the Indian. So then he asked another Shaykh over there, he asked a Kasha, and he said, well, where we got Oises, a Chatika, that they're mamish part of the thing, and so of course if they give over the message, and since they give it over, then how can you get even this thickness? Yeah, it must be so delicate that it's hardly noticeable, because those Oises are Minayu Obey of the Indian itself. So therefore he comes up with another idea that Rabbi Yehuda, and he's Mazbud Barina. Here he just mentions it very briefly. And over there he said there's an Indian of what we call a kova. Here he just mentions the two, the one alongside the other. Over there he talks about them separately, one from the other. And he says there's his slabshas and there's a kova. And he said, what is he from a kova? So he brings an amazing mashal from how the embryo inside the womb of the mother, it gradually becomes a whole embryo, and at the beginning it's just a little weenie. Yeah, how they say in science, it's a little weenie infinitesimal, or whatever you call it. What's the name? What's it called? I've forgotten the name of it. What they call the little weenie thing that the embryo begins to grow from. I forgot what it's called. Anyway, is it so the Rebbe says, "Wuji to us. How does that happen? How does it grow from a little infinitesimal dot into a whole big human being?" So he said that's because it holds itself up in the womb. It delays. It doesn't hurry to go out, and that what you might call delay causes all this amazing shinui in that nakuda, and causes a whole thing. So we see, and it's brought down, that the longer a child is in the womb, the more healthy he's likely to be. And that's the whole amazing thing about Moshe Rabbeinu, that he came out after 7 months, and after Pekeni he was healthy. What they're going to do is that the longer an embryo is in the womb, the better it is. In other words, the more shehiha, the better it is. And the Rebbe brings different mishalim over there to indicate this principle. Yeah, he brings like the union of a garden in the ground, that when it grows, it first of all becomes mamish absolute garnish. Over then, by remaining inside the ground, by aligning with the ground, it gradually in time, it gradually produces a new entity, and it pops up through the ground into a noticeable entity. So therefore, he said we see that there's this concept of a cover. So Lamaila, we can't talk about a cover in time, because we're talking beyond time. We can't talk about a cover in time. But there's a musik idea called a cover, like as it were, holding back inside that madrega, and not just going through it as an entity of what we call ma'avir, not just passing it through, but stopping and, as it were, reforming the self inside the entity. That's called a cover. So the Rebbe says to cause this avus in the oil, have to have both. He said otherwise the oil is too high, that just the oisias will change it, because these are oisias hakika. So they wouldn't be enough. They cause a certain little darkness, but they wouldn't be enough to cause a emes shinui, even a very delicate shinui, because you're talking about oil which is the oil's only been through a tzimtzum. But a tzimtzum has only made it possible that you can do all this to it. Or once you're doing it, you're still doing it with oil which is ain't it. But got it. At the far, in order to do it, you've got to have both the slapshas, it's got to enter those oisias, the slaps in the oisias, and it's got to have a cover, both of them. He said both things are necessary to achieve even this minimal avus with iron in the oil. So what is the meaning of avus? What is the meaning of an avus in the oil? And so I was you talked to us up here on Baruch Hashem. I remember I once learned that in Samech Tes. And so I knew I go, and I was looking for a lot on Baruch Hashem. I found over there. That the Rebbe says over there that the idea of an avus means that the absolute simplicity of the oil alters somewhat, and even though it remains ain't safe, but it loses some of the simplicity. Now that's exactly what we learned before, that the genuine idea of a urida in oil which is ain't safe is the union of the Peshitas Bador. They're not having any shaykhs to any detail or to any prat. And that doesn't affect the actual mispashtas of the Insof. It can still be mispashtas of the Insof, but it loses the union of the Peshita. So Isavus means that you can talk to that oil now about going into a kli. It's become a little bit more, how they call it, thickened, that it's able to relate to an entity called a kli. And even at that madrega, putting it eventually into Chochmei Lo of Atzilus, I mean, that's a pretty tremendous, amazing madrega in its own right. Oh, but nonetheless, the Gabi that Peshita, that's already a madrega. That's a shame madrega. Imam does a touch avus, is avus of the earth, and that comes about through the two inyanim or three inyanim. First of all, the inyan of the tzimtzum, and that's called the tzimtzum of Ak, and then there's the inyan of oisias, which are the inyan of parsa, and in the parsa gufa, that's the work. It's got to sort of hold itself up a certain moment in the parsa. And once you get all those three in your name, then you get this Indian of Isavus. And you might say, well, who told you to go into all that? Well, the Rebbe said, I am in the I'm only doing what I'm told. And furthermore, I'm trying to save you guys a lot of work, because if I were to send you up and say, look, you guys just look it up in Samech Tes, now just to waltz further, I'm sure, I mean, with all due love and respect, I'm sure you would find it a little bit difficult in Samech Tes, because it's really amazing. It's one of the most amazing drushim that you'll see in Mamish. You look all over, it's Mamish amazing. So I'm trying to help you guys out a little bit, just to put it in order for you. So we see that those are the inyanim. He said, well, here the Rebbe just mentions it quickly, since he slaps just akova. And eventually they can use the expression, they can sort of have some idea, maybe give it a little subshuttle, and you say, oh yeah, this is that. But to really get to it, you got it, and that's why the Rebbe says, Ein Shamba, Samech Tes. Alright guys, so don't worry, we just finished this little part, and all of a sudden it becomes very weighted again. It's amazing. All of a sudden the Rebbe seems to say to himself, well, this is getting a bit heavy for everybody, and all of a sudden he goes over to another tone altogether, and it becomes sort of different approach, at least for a couple of pages. Then we strike Shmini Atzeres. Once you get into Shmini Atzeres, you guys are going to have to tighten your belt.